ChildTrauma Academy and an adjunct professor in the departments of Psychiatry and Behavioral Sciences at the Feinberg School of Medicine at Northwestern University in Chicago and the School of Allied Health. The College of Science, Health and Engineering, La Trobe University in Melbourne, Victoria, Australia. His work, again, on the impact of abuse, neglect, and trauma on developing brains has impacted clinical practice, programs, and policy across the world. He's the author with Maia Szalavitz of The Boy Who Was Raised as a Dog, a best-selling book based on his work with maltreated children, and the book Born for Love, Why Empathy is Essential and Endangered. And his most recent book, What Happened to You? Conversations on Trauma, Resilience, and Healing, which is co-authored by Oprah Winfrey, was released in 2021, and we had his book available to the first 500 people, so hopefully that includes all of you, and you got it when you arrived.
Just as fast with his hand as he is on the track, because apparently he signed all 500 copies for all of you also. And then when I said his sense of humor, you know, this first best-selling book he had, The Boy Who Was Raised as a Dog, his mother, who was in Bismarck, said, "Bruce, come on, I wasn't that bad, was I?" And he was like, "Mom, it's not a biography. It wasn't about you." But anyway, but let's give him a great, warm North Dakota welcome to our home North Dakota incredible Dr. Bruce Perry. He's live on the screen. We'll be back to ask him a few questions. Woo!
Thank you very much. I have to say, Governor and First Lady, I'm a fanboy of both of you. I think what you've been doing in the States pretty remarkable, and obviously that what the First Lady's doing has been life transforming for many, many people. I wish I could be there in person. I know I have some friends that thought I was coming in person and wanted to get together, but I had to unfortunately tell them that this was going to be a virtual presentation. So I'll get up there at some point. You know, it's always a little bit tough at the end of a day where there are so many powerful, moving conversations and presentations to talk a little bit about what's under the hood, to talk a little bit about the mechanics, the mechanisms by which the brain makes us either more vulnerable for the effects of a drug or less vulnerable to the negative effects and impact of a drug. And yet I think understanding this is really important for inventing and reinventing the way we think about recovery. So if you will bear with me for 1 minute, I'm going to do a little science, and I hope it's not, I know that it's tough to sit after a long conference and listen to stuff like this, but hopefully it won't be too bad. So I'm going to show you my screen, and I'm going to show you a bunch of slides, and I hope it's not too much. The first thing I want to say is this is a drawing of the brain, and I think most of you know a little bit about the brain, but I'm showing you this because what we know about the effects of alcohol, of meth, of all of the substances that people struggle with is that they do impact other parts of the body, but the primary area that they impact is in the brain. And one of the things that it can help us better understand the impact of taking a drug and the negative effects of a drug and the way a drug can ultimately become something that we are dependent upon and struggle with is if we know a little bit about how the brain works and how these drugs do work in the brain. And more important, though, is that if we understand a little bit about the neurobiology, the biology of what we call connectedness, if we understand about why relationships are so powerful in helping us buffer the negative effects of stress and risk for using and abusing a drug, and why relationships are absolutely the essential ingredient in healing from traumatic experiences and breaking out of dependence, we'll be able to be better at intentionally creating programs, practices, experiences that decrease the risk for becoming substance dependent and increase the risk for healing from the impact of becoming dependent on a drug. So bear with me for 1 second. I'm going to walk you through this. First thing, human beings we're biologically intended to be in connection, in relationship, in community. The biology of our brain is dedicated to forming and maintaining relationships and creating these really, really important biological units, which are our groups, the clan, the family. These are the lowest divisible unit of the species, not the person. And so huge parts of our brain are organized to help us form and maintain relationships, to get to be regulated and feel safe in connection with other people, and to feel pleasure when we're in the presence of other people. And so one of the most important things that happens when we're growing up is in context of literally thousands of repetitive relational interactions with our caregivers. Our brain builds in a neurobiological connection between relational interactions, feeling safe and regulated, and feeling pleasure. And so the three big, important, complex networks in our brain, the one involved in understanding how to communicate and connect with people, the one that the stress response that manages all of the challenges that we have in the external world and the internal world, and then the reward neurobiology that tells us that something is pleasurable and pleasing versus distressing and dysregulating. Those three really important systems are woven together in context of early life relational experiences. And under normal circumstances, under optimal circumstances, these systems develop such that there are multiple pathways that you can get to the neurobiological centers that give you pleasure. But the single most powerful and dominant pathway is through positive human interactions. Now, those of you who are looking at this, don't be intimidated. I don't want you to worry about what NA and VTN, and this is kind of for the neuroscience people out there. But basically what we know is that in the brain, this is sort of a cartoon, a model of the brain. This is an upside down triangle version of the brain. Here's the lower part of the brain. Here's the top part of your brain where you think and feel and have, all of the stuff you learned in school about geography and history and remembering what you had for lunch. All of that stuff's up here. Down here are these core regulatory networks, and you've heard of some of these systems: dopamine, norepinephrine, serotonin. Collectively, these systems originate down here in the lower part of the brain, and then they go up and they influence and they reach every other part of the brain and influence all of the outflow to the rest of the body. And so these really important networks are also responsible for and involved in what we call the reward centers. And so there's a couple of these in your brain, and you don't need to worry about it that much. But the reason I'm showing you this is that there are these systems. When you stimulate them, you feel good. You feel pleasure. And so if you go back to this slide, this is just showing you that there's lots of different ways that you can feel pleasure. You can feel pleasure through eating sweet, salty, and fatty foods. Even though you're not hungry, you can get pleasure from that. And you can get pleasure from pattern, repetitive, rhythmic activity. You can get pleasure from direct stimulation of that part of the brain by external agents like a drug of abuse. This is a really important one. You can get that those systems can get stimulated if you do something that's consistent with your beliefs. It makes you feel good to do something that is consistent with your morals, with your sense of what is right. Now, I'll touch on the challenge with this in a minute, but all of these different routes can stimulate this part of the brain and give you a sense of pleasure. One of the most powerful forms of getting these parts of the brain stimulated is to decrease physiological distress. So if you go out and hike in the Badlands and you're out there in the sun and you walk 10 miles and you don't have any water, if you drink ice cold water, it is one of the most pleasurable things that you can experience. It's incredibly rewarding. But 2 days later, when you go to a restaurant and somebody puts ice cold water in front of you and you're not thirsty, ice cold water doesn't really give you pleasure. You might sip at it, and even if you do, it doesn't really do anything. But if you are cold and you get warmed, if you are afraid and you get comforted, if you are thirsty and you drink, that gives you pleasure. Now, the relationship between a lot of the work I've done and the issue of vulnerability to substances of abuse is that if you grow up in an environment where there's unpredictability and chaos and threat and trauma, what happens is your stress response systems get overactive and overly reactive. And part of that involves the subjective feeling of anxiety. So people who have developmental trauma or adversity feel anxious all the time. And it's such a common part of their life that they don't even recognize that they're anxious. Now, other people may notice that they're always moving and they're always trying to chew gum really fast, and they're always sort of fidgety. And whenever you're around them, you feel nervous because of the contagion of human interaction. But the person themselves may not identify that they're anxious at all. And then as they get older and somebody introduces them to alcohol, all of a sudden they feel calmer, and they get this intense reward from the alcohol. And so one of the biggest pulls to use a drug of abuse again and again and again, or to use alcohol in an excessive way, is that it is a form of self-medication. And now that's not the only route towards using, but one of the things that's really important when you think about recovery is recognizing that every single day, every single person in one way or another has to fill up their daily reward bucket. And if you go back and you think about what are these things that give you reward? What are these things? Can you in any given day have enough positive human interactions that you don't feel the pull to turn to this to fill your reward bucket? And part of what is turning out to be very, very important, and anybody out there in recovery will tell you, if you have, and I'm just showing you, this is the best day in the life of a child in foster care. And this is a daily contact map, and it shows positive interactions that this individual had during the day with people in his life. And this is 6 a.m, this is noon, this is 6 p.m, this is midnight, and the inner circle is family. This circle is friends, and this is acquaintances. And you can see this kid had basically no friends, and he had poverty of positive interactions at the same time that he had lots of negative interactions with people who said, "Why do you act that way? And why are you so dumb? Don't, et cetera, et cetera." But this child, in comparison to this child, this is a relatively healthy kid living in a familiar environment, and it knows his classmates, has after-school activities, and all day long, he's having these tiny little doses of relational interaction. And when you have a positive interaction with another person, it doesn't have to be very long. It activates that reward system, and it regulates your stress response system. So you're both calmer and rewarded. And the result is when this child and this child end up going to a party and get introduced to cocaine, and it happens, this child is going to be much more likely to go back and use again and again and again and again. And this child's going to go, "Wow, that felt good, but, I fill my reward bucket with relationships all day long. So I don't need to fill my reward bucket with cocaine." But if you have poverty of relationships, if you are don't know many people, you're new to the neighborhood, you don't have any friends, or you live, for whatever reason, you're living in an environment where there's poverty of relationships for you because you're marginalized, because you might not be the right skin color, you might not be the right ethnicity, you might not be in the right clique, you might not have the right gender orientation. You can be excluded. And what you will do is you'll be much more likely to fill your reward bucket with sweet, salty, fatty foods and then struggle with your weight, and or fill your reward bucket with substance abuse, alcohol, et cetera, et cetera. And if you are in this situation, if you are looking to get better, if you are looking to stop using, if you don't increase the number of relational opportunities in your life or find some other form of getting regulated and rewarded, you will continue to have the pull to use the substance of abuse. Now, I don't want to go into too much of the science about this, but I'm just going to tell you one little simple set of experiments. If you take animals and have them live in a cage, and rats and primates, and they live in a cage all by themselves, and you put into their brain, you take a little bit of a tube that goes directly into the part of their brain that gives them reward, and you put cocaine into that part of their brain. If they press a bar enough, now they have to press one bar to get cocaine, they have to press another bar to get food, but they're all by themselves. So what'll happen is if you give the animals a bar to press for food and it's rat chow, they'll press it and they'll get a little rat chow. And I don't know if you've ever tasted either monkey chow or rat chow. It's tasteless. There's very little fat, very little sugar, very little sweet, very little salt, but it's nutritional. It kind of meets their fundamental needs. And then they go and they press the other bar and they go, whoa, what the hell? This is cocaine. And they have the sensation. They're going, wow, that's great. And they will start pressing the cocaine bar, and not. Now, the trick is, once you press for food and you get food, your cocaine bar doesn't work anymore. So you can't get cocaine for a while. So these animals learn very quickly. If I do cocaine, I get pleasure. Who cares about food? I get pleasure, 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 and I can't get food. I don't care. I want pleasure. Pleasure, pleasure, pleasure. These animals lose weight and they can literally die. Now, here's an interesting thing. It's not just that the cocaine is so powerful. It's the relative power of cocaine weighed against the pleasure of rat chow. So cocaine gives you this much reward, and rat chow gives you this much reward. If you substitute M&Ms for the rat chow, cocaine will give you this much reward, and M&Ms give you this much reward. And what will happen is the animals will stop using cocaine exclusively, and they'll go back and forth. They'll use a little cocaine and they'll use a little chocolate. And they become, and I hate to use this term, but they're not dependent. They become like social cocaine users. Now, I don't recommend that, but now here's the most important thing, is if you put these animals and give them an opportunity to actually open a window or open a cage so they can go socialize with another animal, they will literally choose that socialization thing 100% of the time. Even if they're already dependent on the cocaine, they will go through withdrawal to be with another animal, to socialize with another animal. This is the power of relationships. This is why you cannot have an effective recovery process or program unless you pay attention to the quality of relationships, the stability of relationships, and make sure that you don't ask somebody to try and stop using if they don't have a healthy combination of positive ways to stimulate the reward neurobiology, because you will fail every time. This person, if they had become dependent, will have an easier time with recovery than this person. And this person is just not going, basically, recovery will be impossible until you enrich their relational environment. Now, the good news is every one of you out there is thinking about your successful process. And how has that occurred? It's been a special person, a group of people who pulled you in and didn't exclude you and marginalize and shame you, who pulled you in, embraced you, made you feel important and valuable. You heard it earlier on these podcast interviews. When we treat people with love and respect, and we don't view their struggles as a moral weakness or evil, and we don't marginalize them, and we're not punitive, and we don't demonize them, we have a much higher probability of building enduring, meaningful relational connections that will make it easier for them to stop. And again, the biology of human connectedness is so powerful that we're able to basically go through incredible physical and emotional pain to get to a healthy point if we have relational scaffolding, if we have people around to help us. Now, I could go on, but I am out of time. There's a lot more to this, obviously, but I think that the key thing is what you've been saying all day long, that when people are valued and people are in community, they can heal, and heal from trauma, heal from substance abuse vulnerability, heal from physical health issues more effectively than when they're in an environment where there's relational poverty, or worse, when they're in an environment where they're intentionally excluded, marginalized, and minimized, which frequently happens with people who struggle with substance abuse. So, let me end the show there, and I'll stop that and come back. And I think I'll stop there and just I think we're going to have some Q&A and conversation with the governor and the First Lady.
Let's give it up for Dr. Perry. I'm not sure why we're seeing the empty chair.
We need to.
Can we see Dr. Perry again?
There he is.
There he is. He's back. Okay.
Hey, can we get him on the screen behind us?
Yeah, and then
possibly.
Dr. Perry, raise two fingers if you can hear our questions. Okay, perfect.
Just so you know, Dr. Perry, lots of applause while you were speaking. You probably couldn't hear it, so thank you very much.
And first question, quick one. I know it's Halloween on Monday. For people that don't know that the Bismarck track team mascot was the demons, and might think that shirt hanging in your back of your thing was your Halloween costume, but was it Halloween costume, or is that an old track jersey you've never washed?
That is my best friend growing up. From the time I was literally, we were 3 and 4 year old toddlers, next door neighbors, Daryl Anderson. He became the track coach and the cross country coach at Bismarck, and we ran track together and we're good buddies still. And when they were retiring some of the old uniforms, they tried to give them away, but nobody wanted them. So he sent me one. So that's an old Demons track jersey from back in the day.
Well, fantastic. We've got a couple of questions we're going to jump in on right away. One of the things on your chart, A, B, and C there, and listen, everybody in the audience was connecting about the importance and applauding around the need for relationships as part of that environment. But tell us a little bit. We had a drum line earlier today. We know that some of the tribal groups, I was just at Solon last week at Standing Rock. They've got a recovery group around a drum circle there. Tell us a little bit about the research about rhythm and where that fits in.
You know, it's interesting because everybody in the world has some form of pattern, repetitive, rhythmic activity that they use to kind of regulate themselves, to make themselves feel better. It might be the pacing you do before you give a presentation, or the doodling you do when you're listening to a lecture, or you have a bad day, you need to go for a run or a swim or ride a bike or go for a walk. All of these things are pattern, repetitive somato, which is body, and sensory is referring to our sensory apparatus. So when we're in utero, when we are growing as a little fetus, we're getting feedback from our own little fetal body that says you're not cold because it's 98.7. You're not hungry because you're getting all of the calories from mother, and you're not thirsty because it's liquid. And so you're getting these signals from your inside of your body that say, I'm regulated, I'm regulated, I'm regulated, I'm regulated. At the same time that your little fetal brain is getting input from the sensory world through touch and vibration and hearing, you're getting that's from maternal heart rate. And so what happens is the way the brain makes sense out of the world is it connects patterns of activity, sensory experience that co-occur, and you begin to connect sight and sound and image and what it feels like. And in utero, early on, for the entire time you're organizing, your brain is weaving together this very powerful association between pattern, repetitive, rhythmic activity and being regulated and safe. And so every single culture on the planet that has ritual and ceremony around creating a sense of community safety uses rhythm: drumming, dancing, singing, chanting, davening, and it makes us feel more regulated. And as I said before, if you feel anxious, if you're dysregulated, and then you experience the regulation, it also makes you feel pleasure. And so that's kind of the basics.
It's fascinating. Now, I know there's one other question on the chart A, B, and C that people in the audience had, and Catherine didn't want to ask it, so she asked me to ask it. But why is the B column, why is that the only person that's having sex on your chart?
I have a whole set of slides I didn't show you, but I didn't think I should at this point.
PG
We have to get to know
maybe,
each other. It's just a first date, Governor.
Okay.
I don't want to go there too fast.
Okay, so let's have a show of hands. If we have Dr. Perry back next year, he'll bring all his slides on the column B person, so we can learn more about that.
I'll talk about all the healing benefits of sex. I'm happy to do it.
Okay. But on an equally serious note, you've got so much experience on trauma. You've written books on this, and we know that when we know from our own intersection in North Dakota with the juvenile justice system that the kids in the juvenile justice system have had so many more acute childhood experiences, or ACEs, than any of the other kids in their peer groups, and that's part of what drives them there. But maybe speak a little bit about early childhood trauma, its impact, and what can we do about it here in North Dakota?
Well, what the governor's talking about that's a pervasively important issue is that we know that the more chaos you have as a child, the more exposure to unpredictability, the more overt threat and fear and pain and injury and either man-made or unintentional, the more your stress response systems are going to develop in a way that makes it harder for you to concentrate, makes it harder for you to do well in school, makes it harder for you to regulate and manage normal social interactions. So you're much more likely to be impulsive, reactive. You're going to have a harder time doing well in school, doing well at work, and it literally will increase the probability that you'll enter the juvenile justice system, because you're ultimately going to get large enough where your behaviors impact on other people. And sometimes it is intentional, sometimes it's not intentional, but our mental health system, our juvenile justice system, and our special education systems are packed with people who are there because of their developmental adversity. Now, what we know is really it's the same. The remedy is kind of the same as the remedy for people who are vulnerable to substance use and dependence. Is the more you can bring healthy people into the lives of these individuals, particularly early on, the more you can divert them out of those trajectories that have such poor outcomes. And we have data, and lots of other people have data, that if you take very young children, 2, 3, 4, 5-year-old children, and you put them in high quality, enriched childcare or pre-K environments, you can divert 20 to 30% of those highest risk kids out of that bad trajectory. And if you monetize that, we know that one of those kids that ends up in the juvenile justice system via the special education system, including utilization of mental health, juvenile justice, prison costs, that's $1 million child. What we know is if you can divert if you have a program that takes the 10 most at-risk kids in your neighborhood and you spend money on that, and it's going to be expensive. It's more expensive than regular pre-K. But if you spend that money, over the life course of that child, those 10 kids, those 10 highest risk kids that you took care of early on, you're going to basically save easily $4 million a year. And if you monetize it over 20 years. So that's 4 times 20, that's $80 million, I think. I was bad at math. But so the right. Biggest bang for our buck is to do high quality, community-based, relationally enriched services for our youngest and most vulnerable families.
Wow, powerful, powerful. And love the economics, and your math was correct. Thank
you.
Last question before we have to go. We wish we could keep asking questions all afternoon, evening, but on the last question is, the First Lady's primary goal here, reduce the shame and stigma of the disease of addiction so people understand it's a brain disease. You started your presentation, Dr. Perry, of course, it's a brain disease. Here's a picture of the brain, and here's how it affects it. I mean, in the world you live in, it's a brain disease. Yeah. Advice for those of us that are living in a world where still we have 1 in 4 North Dakotans that think that addiction is a moral failing or a bad choice. Help us think about how do we keep advancing the understanding around addiction as a brain disease.
Yeah, it's so interesting, Governor, because, and everybody knows this, that I don't think you can find a family anywhere that does not have somebody impacted by this issue. I don't know of one. I've never met a family that doesn't have either in one generation or the next or extended family some struggle with this issue. And yet there's a tremendous lack of empathy about that. And I really do think that part of what we need to do is continue to have events like this. We need to continue to have very, very high profile people like you and the First Lady showing that we're destigmatizing this. This is nothing to be ashamed of. This is sort of, we don't think it's a moral problem that somebody has diabetes. So I think that we just need more education. We need to have more high profile storytellers talk about this. And I think it's interesting, I've been involved in trying to change systems for a long time. And the typical way government tries to solve these problems is to get together experts, have a consensus white paper, make some recommendations. And the reality is that doesn't change people's minds. What changes people's minds are stories. And I believe in data. Data is good, but people begin to believe data and act on data when it becomes personalized. And I think what we need to do is figure out how to recruit our storytelling mechanisms in our society to begin to include those narratives, and that will lead to destigmatization. That's kind of what happened with HIV/AIDS, was that the Hollywood screenwriters got together and said, we're going to integrate this into soap operas, movies, dramas, and literally over a 5-year period, the public opinion about HIV and AIDS completely shifted. And it wasn't because of the white papers that were issued by scientists. It was completely because of the storytelling process being infused repetitively with this content. And I think we need to do the same thing with substance use.
Yeah, amen. That sounds, absolutely, I agree.
Well, again, gratitude, Bruce, for you being with us, sharing your wisdom, giving us a brief glimpse into your big brain that's working so well and making such a big difference for so many people. You've been on my #1 wish list for speakers since we started this. Glad you're here. Hope we'll see you again. Look forward to working with you on trying to solve this important issue. And for those in the audience, Bruce, of course, brings all of his expertise and all of his education, but he's also someone who's had personal experience with trauma in his life. And so again, so grateful that he's dedicated himself to making a difference for other people. So again, thank you. Bismarck native Dr. Bruce Perry, thank you, sir.
Thank you so much.
Thank you for joining us.
Thank you, Governor. Thank you, First Lady.
You.
Keep up the good work.